Good morning, saunterers. And it is a lovely day today here in Weymouth. Thank the dear Lord. And we are sauntering. We're in chapter 9 of Romans today. So let's pray. Welcome the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, we love you. We need you. We welcome you. We invite you to speak to our hearts, to breathe your breath all over us. Just surround us in your presence. And Lord, we look for your miracles and your miraculous intervention today in all kinds of ways. But Lord, be with us now in Jesus' name. Amen. Good morning, Chris and Ruth and Kathy. So good to see you guys. Now, I was thinking this morning, this book of Romans, I'm going to get a bit poetic now. Morning, Pete. Good to see you. And Karen. This book of Romans is something of a symphony. As if you imagine this as being like Paul's orchestral symphony, and he has built to a stunning crescendo. He's had some dark moments of tension in this last chapter, and he's had the trumpets and the violins, and they're all building up, and then the trombones and the cellos take it back a bit, and then boom, up they come into this massive crescendo at the end. Who can separate us from the love of God? And verse 37, no, in all these things we are more than conquerors. And then this incredible piece of prose where he wraps it up with neither death nor life, angels nor rulers, things present or things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Incredible moment of ba-da-ba-da crescendo. Good morning, Joyce and Phil and Chris and Fliss. Lovely to see you. And then it's like he goes straight back into another movement in chapter 9 of much more somber tone. And it's like the cellos have now picked up the theme, and they're kind of tearing our heartstrings a bit here now. And this is a difficult chapter, and the next 3 chapters are kind of quite painful in many ways for the Apostle Paul to write. And he says, so verse 9, he says, chapter 9 verse 1, he says, I'm speaking the truth in Christ, I am not lying. My conscience bears me witness in the Holy Spirit that I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart. For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh. And he said, you just don't understand that if you think in any way I'm crowing about Israel's failure to embrace the Messiah and come into the promises of God that are actually theirs by right. He says, you are so mistaken. You really need to understand. I'm not lying. The Holy Spirit knows I have cried out to God, and he's like in anguish of soul. Good morning, Fran and John and Joan. I've won the Gold Cup today. Just going to say that, anyone who likes horse racing. In fact, I have drunk out of the Gold Cup, but that's another story. The Cheltenham Gold Cup. This is good. Intense. So he says, I wish that I myself could be cursed. He said, do you know what? I value my Jewish, my Israelite brothers, my kinsmen enough that I would be willing to sacrifice my place in glory with Jesus forever for my brothers and my sisters to be saved. That is an incredible statement. And we can sometimes find ourselves in that place of intercession where we're poured out before the Lord, where we're literally try and bargain anything, and we kind of, when we're crying out for souls, sometimes God brings us to this place where we're saying, God, even me, God, just for the sake of the world, for the sake of this nation, for the sake of my own people. He's saying, God, sometimes we find ourselves stretched to that point in intercession, and Paul says, this is how I live. I live with myself poured out like this for my brothers and I long for them. And then he goes on to give some more, again, like we were talking about in a few chapters before, about these different elements that make the Jewish or the Israelite people particularly privileged and particularly set up to really have first bite of the cherry and the first chance really to embrace the Messiah. And hold on, wind's turning my pages over. So he says, verse 4, they are Israelites, and to them belong the adoption. The very thing that we were talking about, the spirit of adoption, he says this is theirs actually, but this is theirs. The glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, and the promises, to them belong the patriarchs, and from their race, according to the flesh, is the Christ, who is God over all, blessed forever, amen. And he's saying, come on guys, you had my own people, they've had all of this privilege, this opportunity, this kind of positioning, if you like, to get themselves right in the place where surely they will come into it, they'll inherit all these good things because they've had such an opportunity. Yes, Adrian, the birds are like a orchestra, aren't they? And he says they've had this incredible opportunity, and even actually the Messiah, when he has come in the flesh, he's one of them. He's one of their own. Like he wasn't born in Italy or Spain or North America. He was born in Bethlehem, right smack in the middle of the land, that, you know, among the people, the Jews. And he's saying, wow, according to the flesh, you've got, you've even had the Messiah come. And verse 6, but it's not as though the word of God had failed. So he's saying something's gone wrong, but has it? Has the word of God somehow failed? Have all of God's promises backfired? Is this a moment where we can say, well, did God see this coming? Surely God made a mistake. Verse 6, he says, but it is not as though the word of God has failed, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. Now, he's going to take us on quite a journey. And it's going to be challenging because it's philosophical, it's theological, and it's challenging. It certainly would have been challenging to people reading this from a Jewish background themselves. And obviously, when Paul's writing to the Romans, he's still trying to communicate with his Jewish brothers and sisters as well. They are very much there, and there would have been Jewish Christians who would read this as well. And so Paul is actually trying to unpack and kind of develop with his listeners a theology that understands really what's going on. So he says, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, and not all are children of Abraham because they are his offspring, but through Isaac shall your offspring be named. This means that it is not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but the children of the promise who are counted as offspring. And so what he's saying is, listen, just because these guys, just because of parentage, and just because Abraham was the person's father, it doesn't mean that they were the child of promise. In fact, it was through Isaac that the promise was going to come, and it was through Isaac, through the line of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham had other sons, first Ishmael, then Isaac, and then some others. But it was through Isaac that God was looking to establish a lineage of faith. And this is challenging stuff. And he's saying, actually, not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. Wow. So Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob's name was Israel, and Israel became the family name of the Israelites and so on. But Paul's saying, listen, this isn't the crucial factor. The biology, the actual genealogy in the natural realm is not in the end, the thing that God is particularly looking for, and yet he is, because he chooses Isaac. And so it's kind of quite a complex thing that he's trying to argue here. So he says, this means that it's not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise who are counted as offspring. For this is what the promise said about about this time next year I will return, and Sarah shall have a son. And not only so, but when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac, though they were not yet born and had done nothing, either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of him who calls, long parenthesis, she was told, the older will serve the younger. As it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So he's saying, right, there was a promise that God made to Abraham and Sarah that their descendants would be counted through Isaac, through the son that would be born to Sarah in her old age. And this is the incredible promise. So, but he's saying, look, listen, it is about a particular son, but it's more than that. It's a higher principle than God just fancied Isaac to be the one. It was that God had made a promise, and so that his choice and his blessing and his his children would be known because they were children of promise. But the Jews understood that they were children biologically, which of course they were, and they traced their ancestry back through Isaac to Abraham, and they were excited about that. But Jesus whacked him on the head with that one, and he said, don't you think from these very stones God could raise up sons to Abraham? And so even Jesus was having a kind of jab at this one with the Jewish leaders at the time. But now Paul's trying to help us understand really what's going on here, and I hope you can get the point that although it was a particular child, it was about the promise that the blessing was going to come through Isaac. This is the key that Paul's trying to help us to see. And then he says, listen, Rebekah conceives these twins in her womb by the father Isaac. And in her womb are two boys. They've not done anything good or bad. There's no opportunity for one to have done something that particularly merits God's favour. There's no meritocracy going on here. And yet God says she can feel that there's turmoil going on, and so she prays and says, God, what's going on? And God says, listen, there's two nations in your womb, and the older will serve the younger. She's, whoa. And this is challenging for us, particularly British people who like to think we've got the corner on justice. Well, so we have not, as it happens, but we like to think we do. We have a kind of strongly developed idea of justice, and then justice is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but Paul's saying, listen, this is not about merit, this is not about a meritocracy, this is about God choosing between two babies in a womb. That is difficult for us, well, difficult for me anyway. Maybe you don't even mind it. But listen to this, verse 13. So verse 12, she was told, the older will serve the younger. Verse 13 says, as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Well, we get that after. That's a kind of later comment from God, but it's like, crikey. You hated Esau and he hadn't done anything bad. Why did you hate him? Well, I don't think it's ours to question this one. I think if we question it, we end up making God into a monster or something, or we reduce him to be like us. And here Paul is taking us on a journey, and he's humbling us. The cellos are playing, and he's humbling us. He's saying, God is not like you. Get over it. And God isn't like us. And so we do have to come to terms with this, actually. Good morning, George. That God is not like us. God wants us to be like him, and he made us in his image, but it's a mistake to think that God is like us. And so there's stuff going on here that we don't understand. Verse 14, What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So then, it depends not on human will or exertion, and the word there is running. It doesn't mean it's not about whether you desire it or you run after it or you run fast or you're the hare or the tortoise. It doesn't matter. This is not about your effort. This is actually something, there's a bigger thing going on here. So then it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. It doesn't even say on God's mercy. It says it depends on God. And I think that's where Paul's getting us to. He's saying, listen, this is about, in the end, this is about God. And God is bigger than you and me, and his ways are above our ways, and his thoughts are above our thoughts, and we need to settle ourselves down and come into a kind of acceptance of this. And where he's trying to get to is that actually God has chosen the Gentiles to be his people, very much his people, alongside the Jewish believers by virtue of their faith, not by any good thing that they've done. And so he's saying, listen, this is just you get offended by God choosing Jacob over Esau, although now I'm sure when Paul's writing, the Jewish people would have been very smug that God had chosen Jacob over Esau, because Esau became the father of the Edomites, and they were a sort of painful nation that wasn't really in a good place with God and was often an enemy of Israel. And so he's saying, you kind of smug about this now because it's in your favor, but actually this is the same God who made that choice is making this one, and he's choosing Gentiles also to be part of his family. Whoa. So he says, verse 16, this is a really important one. Then it depends not on human will or how fast you run or whether you run after it with exertion, but on God who has mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Interesting, isn't it? That even Pharaoh, who was such a painful opponent to God, it seems that God allowed him and even somehow raised him up, gave him that position of power at that time just to oppose God. Good morning, Paul. Great to see you. Just so that he could oppose God and be an example throughout history of what happens to a despotic ruler who opposes God. And so now we look at Pharaoh and we think, yeah, that's what happens if you try to oppress God's people and you oppose God and you stand up against his anointed servant. God will flatten you and wash your chariots away in the sea, and your chariots and horses and riders and everything else thrown into the sea, wiped away. So God even has a purpose for the despotic ruler, and there are some despotic rulers still clinging on by the skin of their teeth, or whatever, some in different parts of the world, and they all end up the same way in the end. Even if they don't get properly nailed in this life, they certainly will in the life to come. They will face Jesus and he'll be like, thumbs down, buddy. Right. So, yes, there we go. So verse 18. So then he has mercy on whomever he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills. That's difficult. That God might even have kind of added this bit of artificial hardener into Pharaoh's heart and made it set even harder, just so that he could smash him to bits even harder. That isn't very politically correct, everyone. So just saying, God smashed Pharaoh to bits. And he did. Verse 19, he said, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? Now we're getting into the argument about determinism. So if God has determined, hey, the great tits are making a nest, Yeah, in our roof. Again. Thank you, Jesus. Sorry, little victory for me. They're such lovely friends. Anyway, he said, so this idea of determinism is that God's plan for us is like rails and we can't jump off it. And there's really, even whether I choose to have eggs for breakfast or cereals is all predetermined. It's all set up by, it's a philosophical argument, and Christians get stuck on it when they start arguing about predestination. But of course what Paul's doing here, he's adding fuel to that fire a little bit, because he's saying that there is such a thing as election, there is such a thing as choice. Election is the theological term that Paul gives us here. God's purpose of election, it means choice. It's not like God, well, it's kind of like God casting a vote, I guess, and saying, I'm going to choose you, I elect you to be this person. And even Paul the apostle, he knew that his call to be an apostle was part of God's choice. It was something that God had chosen to give to him, and it wasn't based on his merit either. In fact, anything but. If anyone deserved not to be an apostle, not to have a nice job or a famous job in God's kingdom, it was the Apostle Paul, wasn't it? Right, hold on. So we've digressed. So he says, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? So can we ever get off these railway tracks? Verse 20, but who are you, O man, or O woman, to answer back to God? Will what is moulded say to its moulder, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honourable use and another for dishonourable use? What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory? Even us, whom he has called, not from the Jews only, but also from the Gentiles. Wow. So Paul's saying, imagine you're a lump of clay, and the potter's got you. You don't get to choose what kind of pot you become. The potter just slaps you down on his wheel and begins to do that thing or her thing, and she pulls it up and pushes it into shape. And anyone who's watched Richard or any other potters or Karen making stuff, it's just mesmerizing watching it, isn't it? It's just fantastic watching this shape appear on the wheel from just this kind of fairly anonymous looking blob of clay, and they make it into something beautiful. But they might make it into something that is used for a very noble purpose, like a very elegant vase or a vase if you're American, to put your flowers in, or to adorn your shelf and just look beautiful in itself. Or it may be a pot of the kind they used to put under the bed when they need to get up in the night and didn't want to go down to the privy at the bottom of the garden to do their business. They could, anyway, enough of that. But that's it. That's the kind of idea. Or it might have been a pot to plant a flower in out in the garden, something humble. And he's saying, you know, the clay doesn't get to choose. And he's saying, listen, guys, we don't get to choose what God is going to mold us into. And then he says, you know, like there are going to be people who it seems are going to experience the wrath of God, and there are going to be people who experience the mercy of God, and they're destined for glory. Now, this is difficult, and so the sort of super Calvinists who like to argue that everything's predestined and so on, they would take this and they would say, yeah, this is evidence that God even chose the ones who would be saved. You know, even that when we thought we were choosing Jesus, it was already predetermined and everything else. I think Paul's making a different point to this. I think what he's saying is, listen, guys, it's God's purpose to choose the Gentiles to be part of his family. I think he's making a bigger point than whether we get to choose to say yes to Jesus or not. I think he's talking about in terms of nations. And he's saying, like, he is destined these people for glory. And we were talking, weren't we, about the hope of glory a couple days ago. which is incredible. It's part of the good news of Jesus. And so he then, listen to what he does here, because this is actually quite a liberty as well that he's doing. He says, even us, whom he called, not only from the Jews only, but from the Gentiles. And then verse 25, he quotes Hosea. He says, as indeed he says in Hosea, those who were not my people I will call my people, and her who was beloved I will call, her who was not beloved I will call her beloved. Verse 26, and in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they will be called sons of the living God. Now Paul is taking those two verses from Hosea, are very specifically addressed to the Jewish Israelite people who had wandered away from God, and God was saying, do you know what, I can't even call you my people anymore because you're so wayward, you're so not my people. And yet, even in that very place where I've said that, there's going to come a day where I do say, yes, you are my people, and I welcome you back. But Paul is applying this not my people thing, this idea of not my people. He seems to be applying it to the Gentiles, which I think probably for the Jewish scholars would have given them a bit of a problem. He's actually saying that this not only applies to wayward Jews, but this applies to Gentiles. This applies to non-Jews, people who have never heard anything about God, who don't know anything about the covenants or the law or any of these things, but who have come to faith in Jesus and have been saved through faith in him. Wow, I think Paul is really making us work, and he's really going to town. He's saying, listen, this is a pivotal moment in history, and my job as an apostle and a messenger to the Gentiles is also to help communicate the purpose of God to the Jewish nation and my Jewish brothers, that they can understand the theology of this is actually predates Jesus' arrival on the earth and all the things that we're talking about. And so verse 27, Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the sons of Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will be saved. For the Lord will carry out his sentence upon the earth fully and without delay. As Isaiah predicted, if the Lord of hosts had not left us offspring, we would have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. So Paul's saying, listen, even Isaiah prophesied that not all of Israel, not every single human being born into ethnic Israel was actually going to be saved, but it was a remnant, a part of the nation that was going to be saved. And I don't think that's a anyway, I'm sorry, I had a thought and I can't remember, but he's saying that even Isaiah had predicted this, that not all of Israel would be saved. And actually, if God had not shown mercy to Israel, they would have become like Sodom and Gomorrah and would be destroyed and judged without trace, because they had become so evil in the sight of God and had become guilty of exactly the same things that Sodom and Gomorrah had become guilty of. So verse 30, he says, what shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it, that is, a righteousness that is by faith, but that Israel, who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness, did not succeed in reaching that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith. And so he's saying, here we go. This is the qualifying thing. God has made a promise. And in order to access and get the benefit of that promise, we have to operate faith. We have to say, yes, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Yes, Lord, I believe, let it count for me. And he said, whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, the access to the promise is through the same process, which is faith, and specifically faith in Jesus. And so he says that the Gentiles who didn't pursue righteousness, they've actually attained it, crazily, by faith. And the Jews who had the law, which was supposedly to lead them to righteousness, missed it because they didn't pursue it by faith. They pursued it by a sense of entitlement, and also a sense of legal obligation, where they tried to justify themselves by saying, look at me, I've kept the law, I've kept it, look at me. And verse 32, as it is written, behold, I'm laying in Zion, that's Jerusalem, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So there was, if you remember back in the Psalms, David spoke of God, my rock, the rock of my salvation, and he's, and all these different things. And so many times, David and Moses and the others referred to God as a rock. And I talk about it a bit in my book, but what Paul is saying here is this rock, which is Jesus actually, and he goes on to explain that in other books that he's written. He says, behold, I'm putting this rock in Zion, in Jerusalem. And it's a rock that makes people stumble and trip over. But whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. And so God places this big old rock in Jerusalem, in Israel, in the nation of Israel. And the Jews and everybody kept tripping over it. And his name is Jesus. And they're still tripping over him today. But not just the Jews, the liberal West are tripping over him, falling, because they don't get it. And yet Paul's saying, listen, anyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. The key is our faith in him. Simple simples, ladies and gentlemen. However, surprisingly not simple when you want to argue the toss with God. And so Paul's saying, listen guys, there is a purpose in it all. God had a plan. He was choosing, he was making decisions, or he had made decisions already how it would work out. But the key was not biology, the key was not genealogy, the key was going to be faith all the way along. Faith in his glorious promises, which are fully manifest, fully available in Jesus himself. Wow, that's a gallop. I hope it makes sense. There's lots more we could say, and I'd be very interested in anyone's comments. Jesus, bless us today, and let us be filled with your Spirit, and let us enjoy all of the promises that are ours in Jesus. Amen. God bless you.